Welcome to another episode of Angels,
Yeah.
Positivity, and Love. Incredible guests the world over with incredible backgrounds, amazing insights. They've usually been on some sort of personal transformative journey, and they've decided at some point in their career and their life to turn around and help others or give service to others. We've had New York Times best-selling authors on, healers, a White House physician to the US president, another doctor who does refugee camps all over the globe, whether it's war, famine, cholera, tidal wave, you name it. Um, and all these guests have been coming on. Not every single guest has taken steps on the show, but something that a lot of audience members who only pop in for the first 20 minutes, 40 minutes might miss is a lot of the guests will take steps, sometimes off air, before the show, after the show. They might catch the scent of lit sage. They might take steps with angels, photos of angels, something like that. It's voluntary, but it's just something, it's a reason why you might want to stick around to the end of the show. These shows, it only gets more interesting. And I'd like to thank our current guest. She's in Florida, but I knew her back when I think it was Washington State. And this is back before Zoom existed, so we only did phone calls. And this is the first chance I've had to actually see her face this whole time. I'm going to say it's been 7, 8 years
Yeah,
possibly.
8 years.
It's MARY ANN Simonds, and she's got a huge bio. So I'm going to try to shorten it as much as possible before I welcome her onto the show. But she's a facilitator, consultant, researcher, speaker, in demand for speaking, educator, coach, intuitive, but primarily an intuitive scientist when it comes to horses, nature. She takes people out into nature to get them comfortable, both with themselves and their surroundings. She communicates with all sorts of other life forms. She's had a book come out this year, A Horse by Nature. Trafalgar Square Books is her publisher. I'd like to welcome MARY ANN to the show. Thank you so much for being on Angels, Positivity, and Love.
Thank you, Michael. This is fun, especially on a Saturday afternoon like this.
Well, we're fortunate to have you. You're a super incredible communicator. You've had a lot of experience, 40 years. You've got a master's. You've got an undergraduate degree in from University of Wyoming, I believe, in biology, wildlife biology, and range management. But you got your master's in 1990 from JFK Universities in interdisciplinary consciousness studies. You've kept going from there. Let's back up. Where would you want to start on all this? How did you even know what intuition was? Did you have it as a 5-year-old? Was it in your teens? When did
Hmm.
you kind of pop open?
Wow. Okay, that's a big question. I suppose because I was adopted, there was this little voice always in the back of my head that made me think I got dropped off at the wrong place and the wrong time. Like I really had this feeling like, no, wrong planet, wrong time. And I spent a lot of my childhood not probably the happy, joyful child that my parents wanted, although they were very good, loving parents. But I just knew that the belief system I was dropped into wasn't the one I came from, I guess is the easiest way to say it. And I joke with people and say, I took the easy way in and easy and hard. I came in knowing a lot of things, but I came into a family and a paradigm that didn't agree with the knowing things I had. So I spent a lot of my childhood with my lips zipped, going, better not tell my mom I just drank oleander water because she's going to rush me off to the hospital. And when I had done that, and she said, "Oh, that's lying. You'd be in the hospital if that happened." And I thought, "Ooh, I don't know. Maybe talking to the flower worked. I don't know. You're a child, so you do things and you test your belief systems that you come in with against what you're being fed. And again, no one fed me bad belief systems. It was just a world that was more black and white, and mine was filled with rainbow colors and all kinds of mystical friends and the animals in nature were my friends. So in a way, I didn't really care what other people thought because I had my own little world of friends and I seemed to be able to understand them and they understood me. So they were my, nature and animals, particularly horses, were my silent partners in life. And so it was my support system. So I just sort of kept my mouth closed, did the whole Catholic school thing until I started arguing that God was probably a woman, and that didn't go over well. But it was always of interest to me from the time I was as long back as far as I can remember. I was always interested in the spiritual dynamics of everything.
Can you share, like, when you were a child or a young one, just talking with an animal somewhere, something that gives us some flavor?
Well, I'll tell you what sent me on my academic path for sure, and sort of the culmination in the book. And this story is in the book. The book's filled with a lot of life stories and field notes, so that if people just want to read stories, they can and still get it. Or if they want the science, it's all in there with nice QR codes. Or if they want the photos, as you know, you use a lot of photos with angels. If you want to see photos of what a horse is thinking, look at the pictures. You can see, and then it's all filled with tips. So it's really user friendly. Oh, you have a picture of that. Great, yes. Um, so the thing that sent me really clearly, I think, off in my path was I was about 11 years old. I was at a horse show in Santa Barbara, and I watched a very nice trainer. I mean, he was a good trainer. No one, he wasn't an abusive trainer. He was coaching a student on a horse, and the horse kept throwing its head and throwing its head, and I'm riding around in the warm-up ring, and I'm wondering, why does he keep putting things on this horse? And they had draw reins on, they changed bits, and I could tell he was frustrated because the horse kept throwing its head up. And he finally told the rider to take a crop and hit the horse over the head to get its head down. And the horse fell to its knees and rolled its eyes backwards. And I was crying because I was 11 and scared, but I had to go say something because I could hear the horse. And so I walked over to him on my horse, and I looked at him. I said, "Why would you hit a horse with a headache?" And the expression that he had, looking at me like, that never even occurred to me. Like, it never even occurred to him that a horse could have a headache. And he was a nice enough trainer. He told the student, just put the horse away. But it made me realize, how do I know what I know? How can I go learn how I know what I know? And how can I teach that? Because obviously it's very clear in my mind, and the validation is always, the result is, does the animal respond or not respond? And so I've had many, many experiences like that, and right into the field, living in the field and with rattlesnakes. I mean, I could talk all day long about real life experiences and how you really test that to say, is this real or not real? Well, let's go out and test it in a situation where it is kind of life and death, and see how that plays out. I'm still here.
Can you share another, like less, just more direct, again, when you were a kid, was there some sort of animal that, again, and I mean, I know this has happened thousands or tens of thousands of times, but can you give us a little bit more flavor?
Well, as a child, I had a horse. Luckily, my parents were very kind. They bought me a horse, and I always was getting the bad horses before I had my own horses, the ones that bit people, kicked people, did those things. And it was always asking the horse what was the problem. To me, it just was a dialogue. And yeah, I would actually say, "Why do you bite people?" I would look at the horse and ask. And they might not understand our words, but they understand intention. And then I would have an image, and the horse would tell me, "Oh, your ribs hurt, or you're crooked, or something." And I would fix it, and then the horse would drop its head and be friendly, and I would go off and have good experiences with that horse, and then that horse would get handed off to someone else, and I'd get another troubled horse. And so at that era, I don't think people understood that animals communicated so clearly with us as they do today, and they looked over that silent communication. And I think what I realized was all of the world of nature as a child, spending, I used to spend lots of hours out in the backyard between the houses. We had little, dirt and hideaways where you'd make forts and things. And I would go out there with the nature fairies and make all kinds of cool things, little waterfalls, and take my little animals out. And we would just play for hours out there. And I was in another world that was, yeah, I mean, you could say it's fantasy, but to me, it was my real world of nature, of talking to the dirt and picking up flowers and making special teas and doing things. And then, like I said, drinking oleander tea and not realizing that it was toxic because, I don't know, the pink flowers were pretty and they wanted to be in my little water special tea. So I had a lot of experiences with nature, as again, primarily horses. And it just kept me on this path of trying to find out why, what is this consciousness in people? I mean, obviously as a child, I didn't call it that, but why is it that some people are so empathetic and can feel and others don't? And, the curse of a scientist is to be feeling, not thinking. And so I did a lot of my work at undermining that philosophy and saying that if nature and animals are much more emotionally intelligent, why are we separating ourselves to look at them when we could be looking with them?
Mhm.
And so that was actually my undergraduate thesis, was how the scientific method was falling apart, because in wildlife observations, you get a certain index of sighting animals in you set up transects and things. And I realized, as long as we're looking at something, it has that feeling of being looked at, which I think Rupert Sheldrake wrote a book on that. But animals in nature are used to being looked at because somebody's going to eat them. So you're not going to see a lot of wildlife if you're looking for them. But if you're out there becoming a rock, and this was a funny story because it's kind of leading, and you talk about an experience. So I was testing the hypothesis. Okay, if I'm not looking for them, I'm just being in nature, just out there enjoying the day, riding around, I would see foxes and badgers and red-tailed hawks. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing everything. But could I record it because I wasn't on transects? So I actually set up transects to be looking at versus enjoying the transect. And so I was having a much higher spotting index when I wasn't looking for anything. So it was done using the scientific method to show the scientific method was wrong. Well, let's put it this way. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't giving us good data. So to test that, I thought, well, what am I doing differently? And I thought, well, I'm lowering my brain waves down into kind of an alpha, well, now we'd say alpha state, but back then it was just emptying the mind and lowering it down. And I would focus on being a rock, just sitting there out on the range in Wyoming, meditating, being a rock, thinking about a nice granite rock. And there wasn't a lot of rocks where I was. And so one afternoon, in the late afternoon, towards sunset, a Richardson's ground squirrel, which looks like a giant chipmunk, but they're ground squirrels, it started foraging around me. And I'm just still thinking, I'm a really good rock. I'm a really solid granite rock, and I have little perches on me. And pretty soon the ground squirrel is up on my knee, and I am not changing my thoughts. I am like, I am a rock. I'm a rock. Don't lose this. We didn't have cameras. We didn't have videos back then. So I'm just staying in rock energy. But when it got up on my head and sat up and went, and at that split second, my thought went, oh my God, I'm a human with a ground squirrel in my head. I mean, that split second, and the ground squirrel went, and went running off my head back into its hole. And I thought, wow, okay, if I can fool a ground squirrel that I'm a rock, I must be able to shift my energy somehow. So I started playing with that, not only playing with it, teaching other wildlife biologists how to do it. And that was really fun because they were having similar experiences, particularly my friends that were hunters. They could go out elk hunting and just be in nature, and the elk would come to them. They didn't have to hunt the elk. So, it's a different relationship, whether you approve of hunting or not. I think it was a more connected experience that uh, other people wanted, maybe for different reasons. But even a friend of mine who used to lead hunting in Wyoming said that he switched from a hunting guide to a spiritual men's guide, because all the men that went out hunting, if they got an elk too soon, they were depressed. And that the process of stripping down and being one with nature was what they really wanted. And he changed his whole guiding system, that you could take the shot when the animal gave it to you, but it was a photographic shot. So you could mount it. And that all dealt with communication. So I also learned to be, I was a very, very judgmental child. So I learned to be less judgmental as I got older, in order to try to understand how other people thought, because not everybody was thinking that way.
We're going to get into the difference between thinking and awareness, or limits, no limits, time, timelessness. There's a million ways to do this. Consciousness, love, unlove, not a waste of energy. Won't call it a complete waste of energy, but we're all going to be doing lots of thinking forevermore. What I wanted to just mention was fairies. I had a photo of a fairy, Ginger. Just wanted to put that up for 2 seconds. I got a Tinkerbell shot as well. We believe in fairies on the channel. You can see them as 13, 14-year-olds as well, or in your hand, classic animated style. It's up to them which way they want to go, or just zipping around as balls of light. Your call. So we're pro fairies here. Second, Rupert Sheldrake, just wanted to mention the household here 2 houses ago in Austin. We had a chance to chat with him. I think we've invited him on the show. If he ever hears about this, he should come back on. It's been, I think it's 8, 9 years, 10 years since we've interacted. And getting back to the point of, there are a lot of scientists out there and they're all doing science things, and science things tend to be a lot of words, data, thinking, and everything from the neck up, which in the big picture, there's an expression. We'll do Zen Joshu. I don't know if it's 700 AD. I can't get much right, but that's okay. As Angel said, there's no right or wrong, but there is proper understanding. So I've got a good Joshu, one of those Zen expressions, a student and a Zen master. Before there were a lot of concerns about how that teacher treats the student. One example, the student comes running up and says, "What is the white ox standing in the field?" The teacher hits him on the head with a cane and says, "You dumb ox." And here's the quote, though, that I wanted to get to. The student comes running up to show that he's arrived here, he's ready to graduate class and start teaching on his own, bust out, start his own school. He says, "What about it when I seek to be Buddha?" And the teacher says, "What a tremendous waste of energy." And then the student happened to be a quick one. So he comes back with, "Well, what about it when I don't waste energy?" And the teacher says, "In that case, you are Buddha." So I would just point out that maybe thinking isn't all it's cracked up to be. Try telling anybody who's adulting out there, entire industries, entire institutes, the Pentagon, anybody, FOIA requests, you name it, any topic. Thinking isn't maybe where it's all at. Who knows? Can you talk to us about this whole mankind obsession with, and remember, thinking precludes knowledge. Thinking's currency is knowledge that precludes possibility. Whereas down here, there's universal knowledge or universal understanding or something broader and bigger than the mankind flow. Can you find a way, and you must have done this a gajillion times by now, can you describe the differences between whatever this is and whatever this is?
Actually, I haven't done it a cajillion times, Michael, since the first time I've been asked on that one.
Ooh.
I can say that I have, in being in the science realm and doing academic and data, you can make data say anything you want. It's how you ask the question, okay? And like I did in religion, I challenged science by saying, well, what do you think a hypothesis is? It's something that you have an intuitive feel that's probably going to happen, and now you got to go prove that it's happened. And then when you've proved that, you ask another question, and so you put that out. And I'll have to tell you, this is a funny story. I just come back from an international flower essence conference in Findhorn, Scotland. And this is many years ago. And I always, when I sit next to somebody on an airplane, I always, especially a long flight, like it's going to be 9 hours or something, I always ask that I sit next to somebody interesting or someone that either can benefit me or I can benefit them. So it's not such a boring trip. So I'm getting on this plane in London. And there's a tall, older guy there, and he looks fairly academic. And you've heard of mirroring behavior, which we do with animals too anyway. So he's acting very petty and putting things away and can hardly wait to get in his seat. So I casually said, "So what have you been doing?" He said, "Oh, I was at a physics conference in London." And I said, "Oh, I was at a vibrational conference in Scotland." So it was like tit for tat. Anyway, he come to find out, I'll skip a lot of the dialogue I had with him, but he was working in particle blasting, and he was from Stanford, in the lab there that runs basically they put everything under an electron microscope. If they look at it, it's physical, but they basically blast particles and look at them. So he was talking, and I sort of casually said, "Well, how are the quarks these days?" And he kind of lit up and went, "Well, there's not just top and bottom and truth and beauty." And he's going on and on about how many quirks there are. And I said to him, "How do you know you're not creating quirks because you're looking for them?" And he looked at me and he said, "Because when we do our research and we find them, someone else has to duplicate it somewhere else." And I said, "Yeah, but you just told them what to look for. So now you've put the thought out there for them to find it." And so he got a little irritated. And then we went off to other conversations. And then I had to ask, because I was having fun with him. PhD, he had 39 PhDs that worked under him. And I said, "What do you think thought is?" And he said, "What do you mean by that question?" I said, "Well, you're exploring particles. What is thought and where does it go?" And he got really irritated with me. And he said, "You're starting to sound like my grandmother. And she was this person who liked to do tarot cards and do things. And I have nothing to do with that." And I went, "Okay." So we changed the subject, and then he wanted to go to sleep. And so he got himself all comfy, and I couldn't help it. It was just too, it was just so easy to do. So he's sitting there trying to sleep, and I'm just sitting next to him, just thinking, wake up, wake up, wake up. I'm not doing anything except sending thoughts. You're talking about thinking. I'm just sending thoughts and the energy frequency of wake up. And after about 2 minutes, he just opens his eye and he looks at me and he goes, okay, I get the point. What are you doing? And then we started a 9-hour conversation. And halfway through, he looked at me and he said, do you do this for a living? And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, screw up people's belief systems. And I said, actually, I think that's exactly what I do. So it was really fun. He got off the airplane wanting to go. Oh, and I never, I didn't contradict him. I asked him questions. I said things like, what do you think? How do you think they firewalk? Do you think that's quantum physics or quantum dynamics? I mean, how do they do that? Having firewalked numerous times. And of course, he had an explanation. And then I said, well, I don't know how. And I showed him a picture that, I said, I don't know how we didn't burn our feet doing this. I guess there must be something in the thinking of moving energy. And so there were all these little tit for tat, but very gentle is what I'm saying. That's why it was interesting, because I could tell he was curious enough to want to know, but his own belief systems were getting in the way of the thinking. He got off the airplane though, basically offering to evaluate flower essences in vibrational waters and asking me where he could go firewalking in the Bay Area. So I thought that little experience was really worth the hours, because you're just to your point, he was a thinking person. Well, I'm a thinking person too. We all think. But where do we put our feelings? Behind the thoughts, or do we put our thoughts behind the feelings? Are we creating the thinking to support our feelings, or are we creating the feelings to support our thoughts? I mean, they're mingled. So I don't have an answer to that. I'm just asking that question. That's the sort of diabolic thought process of consciousness. And in working with animals, and even in corporate working and doing organizational development leadership, I used a natural systems model. So I sort of threw the organizational charts out the window and said, nope, somebody's going to be the rain, somebody's going to be the sun, somebody's going to be the dirt. Let's go in a hydrology model. Who's the dirt? Who's old growth? Who's this? Who's that? And at first there was resistance. And then when people realized there was no good or bad, there was no linear, it was a system, everybody works together, everybody has value. Old growth has value because they have the history. If you all want to be the suns and you have no rain and soil, then that's a problem. The organization's going to fail. And so it was sort of a new model back in the 80s when I put it out. I was at JFK, the University in Consciousness Study at the time. But it made me realize that we're operating in an intellectual paradigm that says thought and thinking is credible, but feelings are not. And I would argue and say most of nature operates off a binary system of attracted to something that feels good or running away from something that doesn't feel good. There isn't a lot of thinking and judgment about it. Not to say there isn't, but at the lowest level, it's this feels good or this doesn't feel good. And so if you play music for a plant and it likes the music, it feels good. The vibration feels good. So it grows that way. If it doesn't, it grows the other way. And I think people are like that too, but we don't talk about it that way. Animals, horses, I write a lot in the book, and there have been people that have read the book and said this could have been written on people. Yes, it could have, because a lot of the evaluation of sensitivity and awareness, intelligence, confidence, cooperation, the way to assess a horse, horses don't see themselves as individuals. So you can't assess a human or a horse as an individual because we're a social species. So if you assess as an individual, you've just taken them outside the context of how we operate. You have to assess within that context of social interaction. And that is emotional, and that's feeling, to your point, Michael.
Can you talk to us about the universe? How big is the universe? Love the fabric of the universe? And let's just go for a couple more eternal questions that people have asked for thousands of years. But the Pentagon FOIA request, it's a big topic these days. The whole concept that maybe we're not alone in the universe, which I would argue the animal species out there, they're incredibly intelligent. They know what they're doing. We're the only species that doesn't know what it's doing 90% of the time. We think we do. And that's the emphasis is on the word think. How big's the universe? Do other species exist that are love trying to help us out?
Oh, wow. Well, first I'd say I don't know, but I can say from personal experience that the universe is a lot bigger than we think. Okay. And the idea that we live in a three-dimensional physical reality, even as a child, never really appealed to me. I don't know why, but I think it's because I had fairies and angel friends. And so it was like they had to come from somewhere. And when people would say, well, you make them up in your head. Well, what difference does it make if we're all connected and we're all drops of water out of the same bucket? If you join the bucket, what difference does it make? You have little drops to play with then. But if you don't know you're in the bucket, you don't have anybody to play with except your drop. And so it's like I had this ability and of having the friends in nature, and they had names, some of them did not have names. And I realized that even in nature, animals identify each other not just by what they look like and smell like, but they also have a thought form of how they name and identify each other. In fact, there's a talk that's going to be, I think it's next week, on the interspecies internet, of a researcher who has documented that elephants call each other by name.
Hmm.
And it's because, getting back to that hypothesis I mentioned, if you don't think it exists, if you don't think animals talk, then you're not going to ask the question, do they talk to each other? If you don't think they understand language, it's like what my horse is quite communicative. Um, and she's a very smart horse. And I honestly never thought that she'd learn words. Dogs learn words. But because she really likes bananas, and that word to her she understands, if she's eating grass with me somewhere and I look at her and say, Coco, you want a banana? She instantly looks up and starts walking back to her stall. It's like, I want my banana. I'm like, you know what a banana is. And, picking up these things because I've been open-minded to give her the opportunity. And I think that is what, the book talks about a lot, the different channels of communication, that there's so much out there, and we're just starting to squeak the door open to understand this dimension, but we're filtering into other dimensions, the quantum field, for instance. You can't, just because you don't see it and you don't want to believe it, doesn't mean it's not there. And, that's where people are starting, I think, to realize that what is most important to us here, and I'll take it into the universal piece, is it is all about relationships. It's all about a frequency of love and relationships. So whether you want to create dynamic fighting about that, or you want to just be in that bliss, I mean, I think that's where you get into, humanity and the nature of man, and Descartes, and is man inherently bad or is man inherently good? I mean, there's probably a little bit of everything. And same with the animals. You can't say all horses or all dogs or all cats are all good and everybody else is bad. There's good souls and not so good souls out there, prospectively, from how they interact. But then if you go to a higher level, are we just all actors in one big play and we're all playing different roles? And if you go to a higher level, then you have to ask, does it really have any meaning at all? It's like the Tao. If you have to explain the Tao, does the Tao exist? And so I can't answer your question. That's a big question. What is the universe out there? I don't know. It's filled. But I can say that there's an excitement of when the train comes to the station, it's like, oh, goody, now where am I going? And I think I'm going back to the planet where we didn't judge so much and didn't criticize so much, and it was a kinder, nicer space,
Mm.
whatever that was.
Look, we certainly all could use a little more kindness, gentleness, a little less thinking. One angel named Charlotte, who's a blue ball light, said 7% less thinking daily is the Olympic gold medal for us all. We can flip that pancake. What's 7% less thinking? It means 7% more time here, whatever that is. So walking the dog, hug the horse, enjoying mowing, reading poetry, a million ways to be here, but there's 40 million reasons spinning around that say you can't do that. It's up to you each moment. Joy. I wanted to mention Joy because my dog is named after that angel and she knows bananas. And whether it's silent, I didn't say the word bananas, or I'm just sneaking over to the kitchen to try to make a smoothie, the first crack or touching the energy of the banana, it's over. She's got a sixth sense. She'll be on this side of the couch asleep. The head pops up and she's over to get her two mandatory slices of banana, like a toll booth on a highway. Okay, tell us one of those moments that was serendipity, synchronicity. It was a stranger with sparkly eyes. You were at school, you were on the small town main street walking by, and the stranger said something to you. You just needed to hear it that day. You turn around, they're gone. Do you have one of those moments where you're still scratching your head today, or do you know who it was? What's something you can't explain with a scientific mind, rationale, or thinking, or logos, or psyche, or ego? What's something that still is incredible? The universe stepped in some form or fashion.
Wow, I'm having to do flashbacks. What I was thinking of when you started was I still have no explanation, and neither does anybody else. When I was in Tokyo teaching the vet schools, I was teaching interspecies communication to veterinarians at the Nippon Animal Science University. We were up on Mount Fuji, and we were doing Shinto things, and it was pretty fun because I realized something about Japanese culture is that they're such a group mind that all the exercises I had them doing that here in the US or in Europe takes, say 15 minutes when we do animal energies, they were all finishing in like 3. And I'm like, no, you can't be all right. And they're all like, yeah, we are. Everybody, like they would just think elk and the other people would guess it. There wasn't like just the banana thing. There was no acting out and taking on the energy. It was like somebody would start to act and they go, oh, eagle. And they're like, how do you know that? They were all getting it. I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys are really good in group minds. So I don't know what happened that whole week of teaching. There was very it was a transformative time. And I remember my interpreter had said to me, you need to feel this gentleman's energy. And I said, no, 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 no. I'm very careful who touches my energy. And he was someone taking the course. He was actually Japanese, but he lived in Spain. So he spoke Spanish and Japanese, but not English. And so we had several consciousness discussions with little stick figures and pictures on the board. And my interpreter kept saying, you really need to feel his energy. And I'm like, no, 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 no. So we went all evenings and all night. And finally, I had such a bad headache, I remember. And I had music, I had everybody in a meditation. And so he came over and I went, okay, let's see. And I'm testing him, right? I'm like, all right, let's see how good this guy is. Well, he managed to take my head ache and put it in my knee. So then he went down to my knee and I'm like, okay, so you can move energy, you can move pain. That's tricky. And I'm still in this, I'm not letting go of this at all. And then all of a sudden, I don't know where it happened, but he did something and he's on my knees or my feet. And it felt like the breath of God. That's all I could say. It just went, and I'm like, okay, I'm out of my body now. I have to get back in because I have to finish the meditation's going to wrap up here and we need to regroup. And I'm thinking, how do I get back in my body? I mean, that was really my thought line there. Like, I'm not sure I can feel my body anymore. And so I'm like trying to will it, like, get back in your body. And so I had some very strange things happen that week. And, the pictures that were taken with my interpreter, I think I've shown you that picture. It looked like the Virgin Mary around me, but maybe it was an angel. And people would comment, yeah, oh yeah, they see her a lot on Mount Fuji. It was this apparition. And we even sent all the photos in to the professional lab to identify how somebody could have done that on a little Kodak Instamat. And they were like, there's no way this could have been done. This had to have been shot this way because you can't get light that silhouetted in how they developed. So to this day, I don't know who those beings were. I don't know where they came from. They were entertaining and they certainly blew open some things in me that definitely I came back. I was hospitalized, I had some things erupt in me. It was just like very strange. Um, and then when I tried to find that gentleman again, um, he seemed to have disappeared. So there you go. It's like, so those kinds of things, more of my experiences have been with the animals, out in the field, living in nature and having a rattlesnake friend or possum friends and having, animals out in nature walk side by side with me and thinking, this is weird. I don't think pronghorn antelope usually just walk up and follow people like this, but maybe they do. I don't know personally that many pronghorn antelopes. So, and having rattlesnakes follow me along a transect line and thinking, you must be looking for a free meal only to let out a free meal and have it not interested at all, just curious. So teaching me curiosity and empathy and I think my first experience with, if I can jump into a rattlesnake story, because people have, I think, predetermined fears around snakes, and I don't think I had any attitude one way or the other. But when I was at University of California, Irvine, before I went to University of Wyoming, I transferred. I was taking a desert ecology class, and I was all excited as a freshman. And we go out to the desert in the Palm Desert, and first thing the professor does is he goes out and kills a few rattlesnakes so we can have dinner. I'm horrified, like horrified. I thought this was a desert ecology class where you studied rattlesnakes and mice and, put it all together. And I think I was the only girl in the class, which was pretty typical back then in wildlife in the 70s. And so they were all laughing. And I just said, I'm not sleeping in this cabin. I'm going out with my sleeping bag on the desert. And they were like, oh, no, 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 no. You have to sign a release and, we can't be responsible. You're going to wake up with rattlesnakes under your sleeping bag. And I'm like, you know what? I'd rather have rattlesnakes under my sleeping bag than be sleeping with rattlesnake killers, honestly. So I went out and slept in the desert, and it was, springtime. So it was cool at night still, and the sun would come up, and I got up early, and I had a down bag. So I didn't have an air mattress because I was planning on sleeping in the cabin at first, but I could feel the rattlesnakes under me. And I think there might have been two. I didn't actually count them. I could just feel they have very thick, round, and they were staying warm under my sleeping bag. And so I got up in the morning, go off to the rocks and, the bathroom. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be really careful, go really slow, because snake can't move fast when they're cold. So I moved very slowly and went off. And I basically said, all right, guys, I'd like you to be gone when I come back, but it's all right. If you need to stay and warm up, that's fine. And I remember I was walking up, there was a big rock crevice up there, and I thought, oh man, the sun's just coming up. I'm going to go sit and meditate on the sunrise in the desert. It was really beautiful. And as I started to climb up, there was another rattlesnake there, and I started to step on it, and I startled it. And that rattlesnake jumped up in the air, and I'd never seen a snake do this, and it's almost like a wheel. It just kind of jumped up in the air and rolled itself down to another rock. I felt so bad. So I sat on this rock looking at this rattlesnake, and it's maybe 3 feet away from me on another rock, a little bit lower. And I was crying. I was so sad. I said, I am so sorry. I mean, you did everything in your power to tell me you were there. I know you're cold, and that probably was not comfortable for you jumping up like that. And I just looked at this snake, and the rattlesnakes have black eyes and have black tongue. It was just looking at me and sensing it couldn't move very fast. It couldn't coil. It was still just kind of lying there. Part of me just wanted to pick up the snake and warm it up, and the other part was like, no, that's the thinking part that goes, no, probably not a good idea. So I did keep the distance, and I could really hear the snake consciousness talking about, why do you have such fear of us? Here it is as a creature that has a rattle to even tell us not to step on it, and we have such fear. And that experience stayed with me throughout my field career, where I would go down, like in Colorado, in Rifle, Colorado. I had to walk down an area of rocks that were all rattlesnake nests. And all I had to do was tune in and say, all right, guys, I'm coming down. You guys need to tell me where to step because I'm going to go fast. I'm not going to step on anybody, but you could just hear them going, and I was like, I was guided to just trot down the rocks. And the same place where I had a rattlesnake, like I said, follow me on my transect lines. And I used to think it wanted to eat, but no, it didn't want to eat. It was curious. It was just curious. What are you doing? And it just came along and would watch. And I'd talk to it. And each spring I had to go back every few months to check trap lines during the spring and summer. And that same rattlesnake would be there. And I'd kind of look for him. It was I felt like it was an old soul is the way. So you can argue, was that normal behavior, abnormal? Were they angels in rattlesnake form? Was it this? Was it that? Was it figments of your imagination? And I guess I never thought past that. I just experienced it. I felt it. And I think being able to let people understand that their feelings are real, whether they're fearful feelings or happy feelings. And those feelings do change our chemistry, our biochemistry, and they do change our thoughts. So if you have a feeling of love and you have no fear, that changes the frequency dynamics of the relationship. And, knock on wood, I guess, I look back now and my thinking judgment says, wow, being 18 years old off in the middle of Wyoming on the range, 80 miles from anywhere, could have been bit by rattlesnakes, I could have had a million things happen. Never once living in the field did it ever occur to me that anything other than beauty and silence and nature supporting me would happen. And I realized what happens when we get back to the science and the thinking is that the deeper into nature you go, you let go of language so you can't talk. Like language was a very hard skill set to learn again. You go from a scientist looking at to looking with, and you become a naturalist. And I've watched other scientists and wildlife biologists do the same thing. You go out and you're like, you're going to study this, and pretty soon you're a naturalist because you understand the system, but you can't prove it, but you know it's true because you've observed it. And then pretty soon, as a naturalist, you get the bigger picture into the universe and you become a spiritualist. And it's this progression of opening the heart and trusting that we're connected to everything through the frequency of love.
Beautiful. Hey, your Japan part, I got to jump back to that, but I'm going to be jumping for just 2 minutes to kind of play moderator here. Leah Suzuki is a sensei when it comes to Aikido, like a sixth Dan or seventh black belt level, has a teaching school in LA, but has been all over the world to teach. But when she was still learning, she was in Japan for 10 years. And something you said about Japan with that gentleman and the energy, there was one of the two older teachers, senseis, Takaneda, maybe, I can't remember, but it'll be in the notes of the video. She would have been the fall of 2024. They have this experience where it's not about combat. There are no competitions. The goal is to not only preserve your own self, but to protect your enemy who's attacking you, is to keep them as minimally injured as you flip them and dispose of them onto the mat behind you. And so she quickly looks, and as a teacher today, she'll look to make sure that Bob with the sore knee can get up fast enough before she's flipping Henry, Ted, and Joseph right on top of the same spot and doing 40 students in a row.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
back when she was learning, there's a wise, we'll just call him an old sensei, and she goes to reach for him because they say, come on, and they do the whole row of people one at a time. She said when she touched his wrist, there was nothing there. The energy, nothing there. And then
Yeah.
she said time went kabobbly-goop, and in a split second and a half or less, she was on her back on the mat wondering, where did time go? Energy. She has no memory of it, and she's looking up. And so they tap into something, the force from Star
There's
Wars.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can
I don't,
go through YouTube and visit all that stuff. I also wanted to mention that the way you're speaking about everything is very similar to an Arla Colette Williams. Um, she's been on a lot of different channels being interviewed, but she's very relaxed about nature. She says what you bring with you is the interaction you're going to get. And more than that, very loving, very knowledgeable. The topic for her happens to be Bigfoot, but it also happens to be all of nature as well. I started communicating with her today by what's it called? Messenger. So I'm hoping she'll be on the show. We're about to have a virtual tea, but everything she talks about and the way that you relate to your surroundings makes a big difference. More love, the more calm you are, the more gentle you are, the bigger the reward, the return for each moment, and the more you'll
oh,
be well received by nature. Also, I'm in a pool today and the poor bee is in there, and I grabbed a flip flop. I wasn't so trusting to just do my hand, but I've done my hand for a lot of other objects, whatever I'm trying to say, organisms. I got the bee to the concrete and watched it for a little while. And then when he flew off, he flew back into the pool. Whoops. Got him back out. He got dried off and he flew off into the distance. Happy ending.
oh,
Finally, I had a different guest, Jonathan Ellerby, PhD, former Canyon Ranch spiritual director, a lot of other biography stuff, but he's traveled for 30 years, 40 countries, and he's this wonderful gentleman out of Canada. His show has already probably aired January 12th, just ahead of yours by a little bit, of 2025. He shared an Amazon journey I'd never heard of before. He went as part of a group where you're not really allowed to interact with the village, but you are. you just can't drink anything or do anything. And so for 4 weeks, they're bringing doctors, nurses, and other stuff, but he's more spiritually trained. He had studied with Lakota Sioux for 11 years, and the village elders, the healing medicine men, had bonded with him. They invited him back because he wasn't allowed to do anything while he was participating in this program. So he found his way back on his own time, and they prepared him for 4 days for a ceremony. And sitting in a hut with 3 older men, he describes in his interview a light, an energy circling the hut, that then when it came in, it was a ball of, I think, golden light, and it came up to him. The old man the next day said to him, did you see the jaguar? And the jaguar had opened its heart, and rainbow light shared with him. And on the show, for folks, if they're watching this show, they need to go back, because he was able to sit like this, close his eyes, and see it from the old man's perspective, and reconnect with the jaguar. And so in a little bit, we'll blow some sage, I'll put up some angel photos, but they're going to give you some missing chapters in the story today that you could talk for 5 hours. We're going to limit it to 2 or 3 max, but you have more to share with us than you previously realized. With your permission, can I blow a little bit of sage and we'll get you talking on some new fronts?
Yes, and I hope you're going to edit this into 1 hour talks, because sometimes it's nicer to have breaks. Don't know that I would listen to. Whoa.
Burn for the first time with sage, so maybe we will be taking a break if we need to. Here's sage, which you are already tasting, smelling, but can we hear it confirmed in Florida from Texas?
Yes, you can.
Any flowers coming in just for the heck of it to blow your socks off, even if you're not wearing any?
You know, I'm actually have had quite a few jasmine, but that's because they're jasmine all around blooming right now. So I think it's my jasmine. My ladies of the night, actually, they're bloomspelia to be exact, and they're they're my favorite little fairies out there. They bloom 24/7.
Well, let's put a fairy up for a topic. And this is Ginger the fairy. You can see her as a 14-year-old, a little more responsible than Tinkerbell. I have a photo of her. An Omega staff member put at the end of her testimonial, and Tinkerbell was my very favorite. So take that with a grain of salt. But here's Ginger, and I'll put her up close. What are you hearing from Ginger for a topic that you know blindfolded, that you could do riding a bicycle backwards, smoking a cigarette all at once, and healthy tobacco only?
Oh my God, you've just given me an image that's horrible, Michael. I'm not getting. She's disgusted by that image too. She's like, no,
What's Ginger have as a topic for us all? That's a fun part of your life story.
I think she wants to talk about fairies, honestly.
Okay, talk. What do you
Very
got?
well, when you have a belief system that they're real, which of course I did because I played with them all the time, then you start to see them. And it was I think Colleen Cannon, my friend Colleen Cannon with Women's Quest. That's I think how you found me in some way. But she and I used when we met, she's done a fabulous job. Was a triathlete runner, and she does treks all over the world with women. But what was unique was that we both actually saw fairies. So we had a way to talk about these little light beings. And while people can see them differently, I worked a lot, very practically, okay, in mining reclamation when I first got out of school. Okay, I worked for Utah International and Atlantic Richfield. And you have to understand that the mining in the Rocky Mountains attitude, there was all men, I was the only woman. And so obviously I couldn't be talking about fairies, but I could be very confident in telling them what I thought. So in one instance, I'm in Rifle, Colorado. I'm out with the company, and I'm a range biologist out there doing range study, but they had a dilemma. Their hydrology model wasn't working. They were doing in situ oil shale, and they couldn't figure out where the water was going. Well, what does a person do that gets along in nature? You ask the nature fairies, where's the water going? So very clearly, I got told the pinyon pine are sucking the water, and that's why the models are off. Okay. So I proposed that to Patel Pacific Northwest Labs, who was doing the research. And I said, oh, the pinyon pines are drinking the water. And they're, of course, looking at me like, how do you know that? And I said, well, just ask the pinyon pines. And both of the PhDs separately, when we were out there, came to me and said, we think you're serious. Can you teach us how to talk to the plants? And so here are these PhDs from the, we did, but we also built a transpirometer and measured that yes, they indeed drank water in the middle of winter when it's snowing out because they have deep roots. And so they were messing up the hydrology model. To that point, another incident, it was also out in the west side of Colorado. One of my first independent jobs, this was later, was to find out what plants would grow on uranium tailings. And uranium has, I think it's uranium 222, it's an isotope, but it's not good to be floating around. So they wanted something that would take up the uranium isotopes into the root structure, but not into the leaves. So it was palatable to eat, but it would take it out of the soil so they could get rid of it. Because, uranium has a very long, 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 long half-life, which to this day is probably why I have so much irradiation in me. They've never understood why I'm so irradiated. And I'm like, oh, could have been walking around in those uranium tailings. Anyway, um, I didn't have any idea who did that. I mean, that's like, how am I supposed to pick seeds and give it to the lab and go, all right, so I gave them all a job and I said, okay, guys, here's what you have to do. You have to take up radium 222 into your roots. You have to be palatable for wildlife, and you have to grow without water and all these criteria. And I could just hear them going, me, me, me. So I went and collected Actroplex canescens and Artemisia. I went and collected seeds, sent them to the lab. They're growing them in the lab. And of course, they come back and go, how did you know that? I'm like, well, I just joked. I asked the plants, how else would I know this? We're in the 70s. There's no research on this. So it was really quite fun just listening to what nature said. Another situation just like that, which led me into making flower essences and vibrational, all the flower essences I made. I had no idea. This is 1976. And I'm the reclamation specialist for all these mine tailings. So I got to figure out how to grow things. Well, I know we're going to seed and we're going to drill seed and we're going to put irrigation, we're going to put water. And then I could hear the little nature spirits going, no, 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 that's not going to work. I'm like, okay, so tell me what will work. And I could hear them going, well, you're going to have to go get good dirt. That's really healthy dirt that has a vibration of really good, solid, rich dirt and put that in the irrigation system so that it has a blueprint to know what to spread on the site that we were reclaiming. And I thought, okay, and had to make sure it didn't clog up the pump and everything. So I did that. And of course, our reclamation plots were beautiful and grew. And it was because nature gave me the blueprint. And I realized nature even has to have a blueprint of how to come back. So whether you give it in water form, like we did in irrigation, or you take healthy soil and spread it on unhealthy soil, you need that vibration. And so my world, even in the science of work, was all, I don't want to say cheating, but when you can talk to nature, it's kind of like, well, let me go ask my friends. I'll be right back with the answer. So it really kept me as a reclamation expert in the early years because I knew we could reclaim things. And even the work I did in New Mexico, the Navajo, working across reclamation and spirituality and culture and asking, what does the land need? And the land basically wanted the spiritual plants back where they were supposed to be. So even though they got removed, they got put back exactly. Like if there was a sagebrush where it wasn't usually a sagebrush, that plant got put back. And then working with the Navajo tribe and the tribal leaders, asking them how to resolve their own conflict with nature. Because half the tribe wants to make money and the other half wants to protect nature. So how do we resolve that? And it came up with thanking the earth, Mother Earth, for every bucket of coal that was taken out, and then purposefully having spiritual reclamation. So it was a little bit ahead of its time back in the 70s. I think we've launched a little farther forward. But like I said, now I can tell everybody because looking back and 40 some years and going, yeah, well, you want to know how that happened? Oh, you want to know how that happened? And even in Hanauma Bay, when I worked in ecotourism, I was involved with doing a ecotourism conference way back. And Hanauma Bay was having problems in Hawaii because the Japanese tourists and other tourists were feeding fish peas and bread. So the whole bay was getting contaminated. So again, talking to nature and finding out what's needed, it was like nature is very happy to have people, but they like the idea of a rest rotation system, like we did in range management. you rest it, you have a carrying capacity, you only let so many people in. And then all the plants wanted to be included, so they wanted people to know what the plants were up there. So they wanted a carrying capacity in the water, but we did an experiment also on how to get fish to come to you without trying to feed them, and it was a mindset of float, have bright colored swimsuits, don't go after the fish, let them use curiosity to come to you. And measuring the visitor experience, it was way higher than it was when they were trying to get the fish, feed them. So all along the way, all the intuitive working with nature has always been applied to a real world situation that has a positive outcome.
Brilliant. Love this. Okay, I'm going to put up a photo, interdimensional photo. It'll move, pulse, whatever you want it to do. Catch flowers in the air, this time flowers that are not jasmine or ladies of the night, if I said that correctly. Here's Joy, an angel named Joy. My dog's named after her, who's put away right now for the sake of the show. Unfortunately, I'd love to have her at my feet. But UPS trucks, FedEx trucks really do get some barking going. Joy, what are you catching from Joy as a reminder for us all? She's super high vibe, 28-year-old voice. If anybody wants to put a hand out at home, feel the vibe, catch flowers in the air, catch ocean, let her bring you Hawaii.
I was just going to say, I get really strong plumeria with her. And really strong aloha, she says.
I love it. And I have one plumeria on the front patio that way. About yay big. Okay, here's an angel named Charlotte. If you could get a reminder on something that you forgot to share in your timeline, she's everybody's favorite school teacher from childhood. If it was Mrs. Wilson, not Mrs. Johansson, if Mrs. Johansson put you in detention all the time. A nice teacher with words meant to help you expand. What are you getting from her as a, oh yeah, I forgot to talk about this topic?
Actually, what I'm getting is she feels like this is a nice place to close down, that there's a lot that's been put on the table, and that to dive deeper is going to take us into other exploration, into a different level. And so what I'm picking up is wanting to sort of wrap up, she's saying, wrap up. What is the point of this?
Mary Ann, it's been awesome having you on Angels, Positivity, and Love. You've been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Michael.